All right, welcome to the Student Leadership Summit section on Hot Topics. The next few slides or next period of time that we're going to go through now will be a panel discussion with student athlete advisory committee members that have joined me, myself, Craig Damon, the Associate Executive Director for Eligibility and Compliance for the Florida High School Athletic Association. I have three students with me, Jenny from Cape Coral, Flynn from Father Lopez, and Jackson from Gainesville High School. We're going to just discuss some of the hot topics that the association sees on a daily basis or throughout the year from our membership, just to get the student's perspective on each of these topics. As I mentioned earlier, the topics that we're going to cover today, one is the impact of open enrollment, non-traditional students, participation and transfers, the impact that it has on your school, classifications, how the Florida High School Athletic Association classifies sports, sportsmanship, which is one of the foundations that the association was built upon. The big topic of athletic recruiting, which always is a hot issue in the state of Florida. And lastly, creative COVID-19 activities that you may have experienced with due to the COVID-19 pandemic that has caused your school to become creative to find ways of engaging with each other and interacting with each other without actually being in contact with each other. So for the first topic of today, the impact of open enrollment, transfers, and non-traditional students. What impact, if any, has your school felt from open enrollment, transfers, and non-traditional student participation? And just to give you a little background, Florida High School Athletic Association bylaws and Florida statutes permit students to change school without impacting the eligibility if the student meets all of the eligibility requirements. So Jenny, has your school, Cape Coral, been impacted by open enrollment, transfers, and non-traditional student participation?
I think open enrollment is definitely a bit of an issue when it comes to my area, just because there's a lot of magnet programs at certain schools, like the IB program, dual enrollment, and there's also like arts programs that students kind of get preference for. And just that in combination with, desired sports teams and freedom to choose where you want to go makes it very complicated when you end up trying to pick a school your freshman year and also deciding whether or not to stay in that school come the following years. So there's definitely been some effects we've seen. Like some of our runners have left to go run in more competitive programs at different schools, even though they're not in our zone particularly, which did end up affecting parts of our team, parts of our relays, and things like that. And it definitely does have a negative effect if you're losing a lot of key players. But I think it can sometimes also have a good effect if, a runner is coming to you or an athlete is coming to you and they can in some way benefit your team. However, it just is another layer of complication to add into sports. So sometimes it can be a bit much.
Thanks, Jenny. Flynn, what about Father Lopez? Have you experienced any, what impact has students that have not started ninth grade at Father Lopez, how has that impacted your school?
Yeah, so as far as transfers go, we both lose and gain a lot of students due to transferring for many reasons. We have seen, though, that we're kind of negatively impacted because a lot of it is in terms of athletics, our athletes leaving to go to a different program that might be stronger in our area, just because all the students at my school come from places all over the county. It's kind of easier for them to find other places, just all spread out or whatever. And so in my opinion, I think the transferring is hurtful to our team because there's just a lot of popcorning around with students and you can't really establish a solid team program.
Okay. Jackson, tell me about GHS.
Well, GHS has its own magnet program, the Cambridge program. So you get people coming from places that aren't zoned for GHS all the time. And whenever we are usually on the receiving end of transfers from school, there's another school in town, Eastside High School, which has their own program. And usually we get transfers from people who aren't zoned from East Side from their IB program over to the Cambridge program. But in terms of athletics, we'll sometimes get non-traditional students for swimming, especially. But it only really positively impacts the team. We don't usually see a lot of negatives from open enrollment and non-traditional students, because especially with swimming, my sport, like it's not as big as sports you would see with like football, basketball, volleyball. So for us, it's like the more the merrier.
Well, one of the things that the folks of my age, adults, the older adults, tend to harp on is that, you know, with the open enrollment and kids transferring and the non-traditional student participation, it's our high schools have lost that neighborhood feel, that community feel. Then the community support is not like it used to be in the past, when, you know, if you grew up in a neighborhood, this is the only high school that you could attend. So have you guys seen any impact as far as attendance at games or support for the community with fundraisers and stuff due to the open enrollment, basically open enrollment guidelines that are in place at this time?
I mean, there's definitely less community involvement from people that aren't necessarily directly related to athletes. Like, oftentimes at games or sporting events, it's mostly just parents or friends of the athletes that come to watch. And so I definitely think that hurts with advertisements, because a lot of people will try to advertise at games, and if not as many people are coming, they're not as eager to put a sign out or help contribute to that team. And I mean, I've been to like other states, like, you know, especially like more mountainy towns where there's only one high school and everybody goes out to football games. It's a lot different here, just because there are so many schools and there's so much fluidity in what students go to that school. I know people that live maybe 2 minutes away from one high school, but chose to go to one that was 25 minutes away for whatever reason that may be. So they really don't go to their sporting events as much. So I definitely think you do lose a feel for community when you make open enrollment as available as it is now.
Okay. Flynn or Jackson, would you guys like to add to that?
So for my school, I'm zoned for my school, but I'm still 40 minutes away. My house is still 40 minutes away from my school. And all of the high schools, we all have our football games at one stadium in the northeast side of town. So you sometimes get a few local folks that come out to the game, but it's mostly football is where you'll see general students attending the game. Like, swimming is not necessarily the most exciting sport to watch, so we don't get a lot of spectators except for parents. And basketball, you'll get some general students, but mostly you just see parents and friends of the students that attend those games. There's not really a true neighborhood feel anymore.
And as a former coach, when I reach back out to some of my former coaching colleagues and just get the input or have conversations with them, one of the things that always seems to come back to be a topic of discussion is the impact of club sports on high school sports. One of the comments has been that, you know, with club sports, kids come in from all over the place, all over the state, possibly to play on one team. So with that starting at such a young age, by the time a student gets to high school, they're so used to traveling 2 hours for practice to be a part of a team that there really is no community feeling, or they don't know what community feeling is like, because they don't play on their local teams. They play on the club level teams just because of the competition level or just with exposure. Do you guys feel that plays a big role into, you know, the open enrollment and, you know, the ability to either students to transfer in and fit in almost immediately without being near, just from their experience with club sports?
For swimming, especially, like almost all like top level high school swimmers are club swimmers, because swimming is a year-round sport. And I've been club swimming since I was 8 years old. And the high school I went there partially because of the athletics, but mostly because of the academics. But you'll definitely see people being persuaded by their peers within the club to go to a certain high school for certain athletic programs.
With running, Clubs aren't as big of a concern just because it's 2 seasons because you have cross country and track and field. So if it's distance running, most people participate in both, and there's not much time to really join a club. But I used to play volleyball, and almost everybody that plays volleyball at the high school level also plays at a club. So I know a lot of clubs would try to get, like one age group or one team together and try to get all of them to go to the same school. So they would have like a powerhouse team that was really working together. I know that there's been some cases of that at all the schools in our area. And that definitely pushes kids towards certain schools, or in some cases, I think if you belong to that club and the coach is like the coach for the club and your team, it may lead to preference for those students who are also involved in the club, which I think can be a problem. But I would say it has a very big influence on sports that are club orientated, like volleyball, basketball, swimming.
Okay, and Jenny, we will we'll circle back to some of those comments you made earlier, because some of those comments are flirting on the line of one of our topics that we will discuss later, but we will definitely come back to that later. And again, this has been great discussion on open enrollment, transfers, and non-traditional students. And with that, I'd like to transition to our next topic, which is classifications. And just for those that don't know, the Florida High School Athletic Association, we classify schools, place schools in a classification per sport based on student enrollment numbers, strictly student enrollment numbers. We look at the number of schools that participate in a particular sport, and based on the number of sports in that particular sport, we trying to separate those into classes as evenly as possible when that's applicable. But there are some times where geographical isolation has to come into place, and schools may be placed in a classification based on their geographic location, just to try to have schools that are close by that are in the same classification. With that said, do you guys think that student enrollment is the best way to classify sports?
I would definitely have to say that I think student population is the best way to classify. I think any other way would kind of complicate it a little bit too much. Like if you were to go by the performance or skill that a certain team has. But when you classify it due to like student enrollment numbers and regional differences, I think you get some like superstars pop up, but then you also have like a very level playing field as well. So I think that's the best way.
Jackson, what do you think about classification?
I think that the way, especially with swimming, the way the classification is, it kind of shows like, especially for swimming, the largest schools and the smallest schools have some of the fastest swimmers. So I feel like it does give a good, I guess, classification for like so swimming has 4 classifications, and the middle 2 are kind of the slower, I guess, leagues you could call them. And I guess it does give a good difference in like skill in the sport, because usually the smaller schools are very dedicated either to one specific sport or all sports in general. Like you get places like IMG Academy or other private schools that focus just on sports. And then you have the larger schools, like in my town, we have Buchholz High School, which is the largest high school, and it's always well known for its athletics. But I think it works out great.
And to add to your comments about swimming, I was a former swim administrator, so I can attest that the 1A class with some of those schools in 1A, they have some pretty elite swimmers in that group.
Yeah.
Jenny, any comments on classification?
I would agree with Flynn and how she said if it was done any other way, it would probably be too complicated. I think there are sometimes some things that might be off, but that is probably due to open enrollment. We can't always control, what students are going where. But I think for the most part, it's the most effective way to go about it. You can never have a perfect system, but I think it does help. And like Jackson was saying, usually at running, or at least in cross country, 3A and 4A, which are like the bigger schools, tend to have, the overall fastest average times at the state competition level, which kind of makes sense. So like basically the more students you have, the more competitive your classification is, which would kind of go along the lines of if you have more students, you have a higher chance of having faster runners or an average faster team. So I think the thought process is right there. But in track, it is kind of like sometimes the smaller schools are really good. Like there's some really good track schools that are very small and very focused, kind of like with swimming. So I think it depends on the sport, but overall, I'd say it's a pretty good program.
Good, thank you. And I'll share with you guys, because again, we hear from coaches and stuff all the time. There's been proposals to take population out. There's been proposals that made population a part of the equation. For example, California is one of the states that, people have shared models with us with what California does. And California is a little bit different because they don't have one state association. They have basically 10 federations. They have an overall organization that's in charge of the whole state, but each section of the state is split up and there's 10 different regions, if you want to call it. So they basically have 10 state championships, 10 championships in their area. But what they, a couple of years ago, we was at a conference and they talked about their proposal. They divide their class schools up into classifications based on your performance over the past couple of years. So for example, you get so many points, and based on your points, they split you up based on points. And then I even think they even had this division they call open division, which it didn't matter what size you are. If you thought you were the best school in swimming, you entered that top 32 class, and it was supposed to be the 32 best swimming programs in the state. Looking at something different than just strictly population, one of the pros from their change has been that they've had more schools win their first state championship in sports because they feel like those schools were competing against schools that were very similar in, I guess, performance from that standpoint. So that has been something that has been thrown back and forth that some folks have talked about. We've heard comments about possibly looking at the percentage of athletes at your school, taking the number of students that participate and dividing that number by the total number of students at your school and using that as a way of deciding classifications. We hear all the time, if you look at basketball, sometimes our smaller classifications, 2A and 3A, could beat any of our bigger schools in basketball, some of the other sports. So just trying to look at various alternatives for classifying our student athletes, because again, when you talk to adults think, some are definitely strictly student enrollment. Some feels that there needs to be a blended model. But again, you guys as student athletes, you're the ones out there competing, and everything we do should be based on what you guys feel is important to you. So it's always good to get you guys' thoughts and so forth on that. So if there was to be a blended model of past performance and enrollment and possibly the number of student athletes percentage of athletes out of your whole enrollment at the school, do you guys think that might be I guess a fair compromise or a fair alternative to what we have now?
I mean, for sports like running, it might be just because there's no limit to how many runners we can have. But, when you pick a volleyball team or a basketball team, you usually try to keep it small, like 10, 15 max. So looking at that, it might be a little bit more complicated. So I just would have to figure out how that changes across different sports.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it differs for individual sports, kind of like weightlifting, or team sports, kind of like basketball or football. I think it would complicate the situation a little bit. If you classify it in terms of past skill level, in the past years, then what if this year's that person that's really, really good kind of got injured, or someone else comes from a different school that was lacking in past years. I think that would take a lot of digging into certain situations, that I think student enrollment numbers would kind of be better in that case.
Flynn, you hit on a good point there too, which I've neglected to mention. There's been talks or comments about having classifications in separate, where sports are classified one way, individual sports are classified as a different way, because there's sort of a difference where an individual sport, for example, weightlifting or track and field, if you have a handful of great athletes that win first place in all the events, you got a chance to win a state championship with, 4 or 5 athletes, where in a team sport, it takes the whole team to do that. So there's been, again, discussion of having, classifications separate for team sports than the way we classify our individual sports. And again, great comments. Again, you guys are doing a great job, and it's always good to hear from the student, because as adults, we tend to think we know what's best for students without even listening to what you guys have to say. So again, I appreciate your comments and feedback. Sportsmanship. Sportsmanship is something that it seems to be, no matter, it's part of the foundations, what the association was built on. Our bylaws and policies mandate that student athletes, coaches, and schools exemplify, sportsmanship on and off the field. Try to be the best person that you can be, treat others the way you want to be treated, and all those cliches that we've all heard about from our coaches. What does sportsmanship mean to you, individual? When you hear the word sportsmanship, what comes to mind as what does that look like? What does that mean to you as a student athlete?
I think sportsmanship in terms of, like, I do weightlifting, so we're all going at each other on an individual level. We're all trying to lift the most, but sportsmanship is kind of like cheering each other on. Like, this person might be better than me, but I'm still going to cheer them on because, like, they have worked hard. They deserve that. Like, I know when I watch, like, our lacrosse games, I'll watch people get knocked down by each other, but after the whistle blows, it's helping each other up after, you might have pushed too hard, but helping each other up and just being a kind spirit in the game. You can have that competitiveness, but you also have to know, like, when it's time to show some kindness or anything like that.
Jenny, what does sportsmanship mean to you?
I think sportsmanship is recognizing that a person is more than just your competition. They are still a person, and there's certain ways you want to be treated as an athlete, and that you should extend that to other people. And just because, they might not go to your school or they might be a rival, doesn't necessarily disqualify them from that treatment. And so it's just kind of like having a level of respect for everyone you're competing with, whether they're on your team, whether they're not, whether they're yourself, whoever it may be. It's respecting the game, but also respecting the players that do it.
I like that, respecting the game, because it is so often showing respect for the game when you do show sportsmanship. Jackson, what do you think? What does sportsmanship mean to you, Jackson?
Well, so for me, swimming is very much an individual sport, but for what you would see for sportsmanship in swimming is like supporting other people while they're doing events, like seeing people cheering each other on. Encouraging people before and after the races. You mostly get the team aspect in swimming on the relays, and I guess mostly just being just supportive of who is placed in certain areas, and not necessarily always trying to create a negative atmosphere when you're on the deck. That's kind of what sportsmanship means to me, is just creating the most positive atmosphere that you can on the pool deck.
And as student athletes here in the state of Florida, not to put you guys on the spot, but have you ever witnessed or experienced or unsportsmanlike conduct by either or seen it by a teammate or one of your opponents in competition?
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of times you'll see athletes get frustrated with, like, the refs on the field, and I feel like that's also a show of unsportsmanlike acts. So sportsmanship is also like being respectful to the refs, like Jenny said, respecting the game is also a part of it. Yeah, like a lot of times, especially in football games, I'll see, um, the football players, they'll shove each other after the whistle blows, or they'll yell at the refs because they didn't like the way a play turned out, or something like that.
Okay. Jenny?
I mean, I've seen girls trip each other in races sometimes, or like block each other. Sometimes it gets a little aggressive. It just happens, and it's hard in running to be like, was that intentional? Was that an accident? Because a lot of times it is an accident. But no, there's definitely been some instances where there's a lot of competition, a lot of problems, but it's never really within teams. It's always just like sometimes something outside. But I think that there's always going to be some examples of that, no matter what we as at the FHSAA does. But I think one thing sometimes that's coming up a lot, or that I've seen, is parents. A lot of times parents can influence sports, whether that's like an individual sport or a team sport. Parents can be unsportsmanlike too if they're cheering for their kid too hard, or like bringing other players down for their own child, or just like saying things in the stands that aren't necessarily helpful, because that can the players themselves can feed off that attitude, and then it doesn't really help if the spectators are influencing the game in a negative way.
Before I go to you, Jackson, Jenny, I just got to give you credit because that was going to be my next question, because I hear it all the time as a former coach. I used to have meetings with my parents about the expectation of their behavior in the stands, because again, if I'm a coach, but mom and dad is the one that supports you, pay for your bills, and take care of you, and if they're yelling and saying things that are inappropriate during games, and you look up to your parents as role models, then you think what they're doing is the proper behavior. So you read my mind with that one, because that was going to be the next thing I had. How much do you think parental unsportsmanlike plays on what kids do? So Jackson, I'll go and let you comment on sportsmanship. Things that you've experienced in swimming, because again, as a former swim administrator, I've heard the horror stories of what goes on underneath the water. It's not all fair game. So anything you've experienced or witnessed from teammates or opponents?
Well, with swimming, you don't ever real see any real contact within the water, so you don't really have any problems there. Mostly, to the greatest extent, you'll find with like unsportsmanlike behavior in swimming, I guess, would be, interpersonal conflicts between swimmers, either on the same team or not on the same team. I guess sometimes there'll be disagreements with being disqualified by an official, but there's not usually a lot of real bad stuff that happens with swimming. There's not a whole lot of swim drama, I guess you could call it. There was an incident that was on my club that there was like a little bit of a rivalry between two swimmers, but it wasn't anything super big. They just had some disagreements.
Okay. And as leaders, you guys are part of this, our student leadership, student advisory committee, which tells me that you're leaders in your school. As teammates, have you been in a situation, or what are things that you can do to ensure that your teammates show good sportsmanship? Is there anything your coaches have done to help promote good sportsmanship at your school?
One thing, we do this sometimes within sports at our own school or with other schools, is we do like goodie bags for regional or state competitions. Like, I think it was South Fort Myers. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure South Fort Myers, and I think North too. It was their first time making it to regionals for cross country in a really long time. So we made them goodie bags with like Gatorades and snacks, maybe a friendship bracelet or something. And we dropped them off at the school, just because runners are you all kind of understand each other. You go through the same struggles of running. It's not always fun. So just to support other teams in our area, because they were really excited about making it. And sometimes the swim team and the cross country team will exchange stuff, usually because we go to states together at the same time. So I think little things like that make you really appreciate other athletes and bond with other schools. And, it's really nice to help out other people and see how you can be positive instead of negative. It's not all just, times and competing.
And Flynn, I know as a cheerleader, you guys do lots of things that deal with sportsmanship and spirit and anything in particular that you guys have done at Art Lopez to promote sportsmanship?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in terms of cheer, we make visitors baskets. So we'll go over to the other side of the track where the other cheerleaders are. And a lot of the time, we'll kind of like cheer with each other. We'll do like these circle like, bonding activities that are really fun. Like us girls we're showing our spirit with each other. The boys on the field might not be, playing as nicely, but at least like we're showing it for our schools. Like um, we're kind of that show of sportsmanship in a way. I think my school is really fortunate that we're able to discuss faith very openly. I think, we pray as a team on all my teams. We pray, for each other, for the other team. So I think that really helps us get into that state where we can be, proud of ourselves, but then also cheer on the other teams. Like my track coach does a really good job of that. Before every practice, before every track meet, we are, talking about how we improved as a team and like what would happen if, someone else on another team was at fault. We discussed that a lot. And so I think going to a Catholic school really, they really instill that sportsmanship within you.
Jackson, anything at GHS that you guys do?
So after every like little dual meet or swim meet, we almost always have a fundraiser dinner at one of the local restaurants. And we've always had positive experiences with that. Not everybody on the team can always make it, but we always make sure to have one. And then after the district, regional, and state, usually after the district and before the regional and state competitions, we'll have a team dinner that we'll usually either cater in or we'll go to like the night before the competition, just as like just kind of to boost morale and just kind of establish just a real sense of sportsmanship within the team. But I've always had a positive experience with my team.
Good. Again, sportsmanship is, like I mentioned before, is the foundation of what the association is built on. And so often, you guys have all had great comments. The adults need to demonstrate a model what we expect from the student athletes. And when coaches and parents model that behavior, it's so much easier for our student athletes to follow in line and provide good sportsmanship. Athletic recruiting, the hot topic of athletic recruiting. This is one we probably could spend a whole hour on just by itself. I definitely could talk about this for an hour because this is a lot of the things that I do on a daily basis deal with athletic recruiting. Is this an issue in your area? Do you guys hear or see or are rumors about lots of athletic recruiting in your area? And Flynn, you want to go first? In Daytona, Volusia County,
So my school I think we do a good job of not, pulling other people away from their schools into our school, but we have been negatively affected as other people pull our students away because it's kind of easier. We are a smaller school, so kind of, that's that attractiveness of going to a bigger school with more people like them. Like it's a lot easier for our school to feel that. It's definitely hard when you think like, oh, our program's growing so well this year, like we're going to be so good. And then all of a sudden they're pulled away to the public school nearby. And then you have to compete against them sometimes. It creates a rivalry. Like, it's a very dramatic situation with recruiting. Like, but I think my school does a good job of, talking to our coaches and making sure that we are not doing that, but we definitely feel the effects of it.
Good. And like I said, not implying that any of your schools are recruiting, but it's a common theme or common, allegation all the time that our office receives is that recruiting goes on throughout the whole state of Florida. Doesn't matter if you're in the Panhandle, you're in Northeast Florida, Central Florida, or down south. It's an issue. So, Jenny, what about down your area? Athletic recruiting, is that an issue in your area?
I don't know about all sports, but for the ones I'm involved in, I know that there's some talk of like, oh, this is like the powerhouse school, or like this school has a long tradition of being really strong, or this school is like has really good coaching, whatever. I've never really seen any examples of like recruitment in the sense that they're being offered something necessarily like that would push them there. But I don't necessarily also think schools don't promote themselves in some way. I think a lot of schools, I don't know, I guess you could say like indirect recruiting, maybe just being like, oh, like we've made it to states, or we have this many runners, or we have this coach, to like maybe 8th graders. And with running, it's really easy to see who's really strong just because of times. Like it's very cut and dry. You can look at a time and say, oh, that's a really strong runner. That's maybe not one, but we can probably work and get them to a better time. So I think there's nothing really like too dramatic with running, but just kind of like you can look at other schools and see who's been there the most. But I guess for Cape High, one thing we struggle with is there's not always fair communication if like the indirect recruiting or just talking about schools is going on, because in recent years we became a much better team, but we haven't always been a good team. Like really only the last 5 years have we made any progress. But there's other schools in our area like Fort Myers, which is always known for being a really strong distance running program. So a lot of athletes will turn there instead, which makes it difficult for us to establish like a deep-rooted program.
Jackson, Alachua County, with the recruiting in Alachua County?
I don't know much about other sports recruitment like rumors. There is like a very small, I guess there was a small push by one coach in our area. She would basically push some of the girls from our club team to try and join her high school team, because she had kids within our club, and basically her kids would help influence other kids to come to one of the other high schools. But that was really just only one thing. It wasn't necessarily anything that was like shady or under the table. My coach has always just been like, anybody who comes, he'll try to make them the best swimmer they can be. But there's not really ever been any big recruitment scandals in Alachua County athletics, to my knowledge, at least.
And you guys are in some good sports too, where it's typically not as prevalent as some of the other sports. Unfortunately, the position that I'm in, I see it all the time. And just so you guys are aware, because I'm just hearing some of your comments, the recruiting I think that you guys have in mind is, somebody offering a lot of money or giving you a car or giving you some sort of thing to come to school, where our definition of recruiting is any effort or act that is perceived to be urging, enticing, or pressuring a student or a student's family to attend a specific school for athletic reasons. So, regardless if I give you anything, if there's something, and typically what I see with violations is where a kid may be sending me a text message, and a lot of our coaches fall into this trap where they think if they don't initiate the conversation or the contact, that is not recruiting. If a parent or student reach out to them, they have the opportunity to respond and talk about things because they didn't initiate the contact. And by our standards, it doesn't matter who initiates the contact, or it's the context of the conversation that becomes recruiting. And it's like I said, to get the urge, entice, or pressure someone to attend a specific school for athletic purposes is considered recruiting. There are some pretty stiff violations, sanctions that go along with the violation. And also there's several forms of it. We have what we call improper contact. That's just basically making contact with someone, and you're talking about sports or attending your school for the purpose of athletic purposes, and that student does not attend your school. So that's where the improper contact come in. What you guys have sort of hinted about was more of impermissible benefits. That means I'm giving you cash I'm providing housing for you. I'm providing transportation for you. You're receiving a benefit that is not generally made available to all students. And it's something that I make available to all students. So, example, Jenny, you might live 40 miles from my school and you want to go to my school or want to change to go to my school. And I'm like, oh, Jenny, go ahead and come on over. I will give you a ride every day back and forth to and from school. If I'm not giving every student that live in your area a ride back and forth every day, now I'm providing an impermissible benefit for you, which is a recruiting violation. And per state statute, per state law, in our violations, any student that accepts an impermissible benefit. So, Jenny, if you accept that ride from me every day, you're considered to have accepted an impermissible benefit. And by our bylaws and state law, we are to deem you ineligible to participate in any sports at any school in the state of Florida for at least a year. So that's a mistake that some students sort of get caught up into and don't realize, our parents don't realize the impact that could have, where it could cost a kid a whole year of eligibility. And if you're going into your senior year, it could take all your eligibility away. So I caution you guys, and for the folks, student that are part of the summit that hear this is, please be careful with receipt of anything, that could be at some point in time found to be an impermissible benefit, because it will impact the student's eligibility for a year. And that's something that, as a former coach or a former student athlete, that's a big deal. And, especially if adults are doing that. So I'm glad that there's not a whole lot of athletic recruiting going in your area, but there is a lot of stuff that's going on in the state of Florida. Some areas they don't talk about it because everybody's doing it, so they don't tell on each other. It's like, since we're all doing it, you can't tell on me because I know you're doing the same thing, but it doesn't make it right. With open enrollment and school choice, if a parent or student chooses a school for whatever reason it may be, academics, athletics, or whatever, and they make that decision on their own, state statute allows that, but it's when adults that try to help persuade that decision when we have an issue with it. And just so you guys know too, so you can share with your students, with your classmates and teammates, you and your parents are considered part of the school's athletic interests. When I mean athletic interests, those are people that have, I guess, an investment or some sort of stake into an athletic program of a particular school. So when we look at recruiting from our standpoint, you as a student could be guilty or could be considered to have violated recruiting policy by urging, enticing, or pressuring someone to change schools to your school for athletic purposes. So typically we don't necessarily look to have a violation against a student, because we know as kids, as students, young adults, you guys communicate with each other, and from club sports, playing on the same team, a lot of times we would love for our people that we're close to come play on the same team with us, because we just feel that it would be great and fun to have that person on the same team with me. When the association or my department, when we find that there's an adult behind the student interaction or the student recruiting back and forth, then that's when we have to take actions, because again, if parents are making the choice, the students making the choice to attend a specific school on their own behalf, on their own reasons, our state laws allow that, our bylaws permit that, so we have no issue. It's when they're urged, enticed, or pressured to change schools for athletic purposes. Just to give you a scenario, let's just pretend that me and Coach Craig is in public shopping, and I run into Jenny and her parents in Publix, and Jenny and I start speaking to Jenny's dad, and we're having a conversation about just about how Jenny's doing, because I know Jenny from the neighborhood. I see Jenny's name in the paper, and all of a sudden the conversation turns towards Jenny is a great runner. We just lost our 2 mile and our mile runner, and we would love to have Jenny as part of our program. What can we do to get Jenny to be part of our program? At that point in time, what I've said is a violation. If we're just having a conversation about, how my family is doing, how Jenny's doing, yep, Jenny's doing well at school. Her grades are great. Her times are good, and everything's great. That's what we call casual conversation. Casual conversation can go on all the time and not be an issue. It's when that casual conversation turns into anything that could be urging, enticing, or pressure is when, like I said before, it becomes an issue. So that's just an example of one of the things that we see. And, you know, comparisons is another. But again, you guys have not witnessed it. I just ask that you be ambassadors at your schools to share the information that you guys get from this summit and from being a part of this panel to help make your school be the best that it can be. And sliding to our next slide, COVID-19, I think we've all been impacted. The association, our staff, just like everybody else around the world, have had to make adjustments to the way we conduct business on a daily basis as a result of COVID-19. One of the things that we have done to be creative is now we depend on Zoom meetings as opposed to in-person meetings. So like I shared with you guys earlier today, you know, being a part of the leadership staff, we have a Zoom meeting every morning at 9 with some Mondays through Thursdays. When that meeting is done, I have a department meeting with my department following that meeting. And the way we communicate with each other now is either via cell phone or through Zoom meetings so that we can interact and make sure we're all on the same page and understand what's going on. What are some of the creative activities or creative things that your school or your coaches have done during this COVID-19 pandemic to help keep students engaged or interacting with each other? And either way, anyone wants to go first, it'll be.
Well, one thing, oh, you can go first.
You're good.
Oh, well, one thing, all the schools in my county for graduation, what they did is they did their graduation at the Gainesville Raceway. And basically they would have people drive up and then basically do like drive through, get their diploma and get their pictures, and then they would leave. But going high school athletics wise, my high school hasn't started any sort of like high school swimming stuff this summer. But for my club, we kind of devised our plans. Like there's basically 2 people in each lane and 1 person is on each side. Basically maximize distance between each people, and like what would usually be one group is kind of split up into 2 to be able to like minimize the amount of people on the deck. And it's like very quick in and out procedures when we're done with practice. But other than that, like nothing else, nothing new is really developed other than staying away from people as much as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. My school has definitely used its small size. You know, we have around 400 students, so we don't have very many students, and we have less student athletes as well. So we've taken advantage of our small size. We've done a lot of Zoom meetings. I know my weightlifting coach has been giving us like workouts, sending them out to all students, and he's been doing like Zoom videos where he would walk us through like all of our workouts. And you know, it's just good for anyone who wants to like stay in shape during this time. But also we started to open up the campus a little bit. You know, we're doing 6 feet apart, no more than 10 people in a room at a time. For cheer, we've actually like split our team into 2 pods where we like practice in 2 groups every single day. So I think just being able to gather, you know, just at least a few of us to practice has been really good, like mentally, because we all really miss our sports teams, and we were sad like that we couldn't resume our spring sports after that initial closure. So I think it's looking up for us.
Good. Jenny?
Well, with running, it's a little harder just because it is so individual already. A couple times we tried to do like our warm-up routine together on Zoom, but as soon as we started the run, we kind of had to cancel the call. We've tried to do a lot of Zoom team meetings to talk about stuff, especially like paperwork, and make sure that all the freshmen are, you know, at least trying to get in summer mileage and things like that. We're starting to be allowed to have practice. It's a little difficult because some people aren't comfortable coming. There's a lot more rules in place, but just hopefully getting back into it as soon as possible, which is in a safe way, and just figuring out ways to stay as far apart while being together as a team. Sometimes it's complicated, but I think we're making it work, and I think the other sports at our school are trying to make it work too.
Good. And again, these are all great things. Like I said, anything during when we first shut down in March, when there was no, face-to-face interactions, did you guys do anything then with Zoom or have Zoom chats, or how did you guys sort of communicate with each other during this March and April before we got to a point where things opened up where you could start like summer workouts or anything?
I think
My club.
I think initially, like my sports team, we used a lot of social media, we would text each other on different platforms and stuff. But one thing that my track coach did for us was she like hosted this like track and field event where we like would make a video of us, like we would run 15 meters and like time ourselves, we put on a little number on our stomachs and and we like had a mock track meet by ourselves. We pretended to do the high jump over like a what's that, a pool noodle, So like that was really fun because we realized like we weren't gonna have track season anymore, so that was really exciting. But
that is pretty cool. Those are the type of things I wanted to hear about. Some of the creative things when you couldn't come out the house that you guys are doing at that point in time. Jenny?
Well, there's this thing called Strava, which is like runner Instagram, I guess you could say, and you upload all your runs onto it, which is something we were kind of already doing, but it became a lot more important when everything got shut down. So like more people would comment, or we would check out each other's runs a lot more, and it just made it easy for us to stay in communication through our running, not just always through text, because not everybody's like a texting or communicating online kind of person. So that was one way we could just kind of see who was running or who was staying motivated, and just making sure that if someone had a bad run, we could see it and, help pick them up, or if they had a good run, we could congratulate them. And well, I guess the very first day that it kind of started, we were supposed to have a race and it got canceled, and we had our own little, like, I think 10 of us came, like Cape Corona invite. We tried to have a little fake meet, and just everybody stayed apart, and it was like the second week of March or something like that. So I guess that was probably the most creative, fun thing we did.
Jackson?
So for my club, we mostly utilized GroupMe and Zoom. So 2 days a week, we would have like a Zoom meeting just to catch up and just see how everybody was doing. And on GroupMe, our coaches would kind of send out a weekly Dryland workout that we could do on our own. It was completely optional. And you could do more if you wanted to. And basically we would just kind of just did that just to keep in touch and stay in some sort of general shape, because all the pools were closed, so we couldn't actually swim for about 2 months. So it was kind of rough to come back. But.
Good. Again, these are all some great things. And, I'm a firm believer as a coach that adversity makes us stronger, and we go through it for a reason. And from the comments I'm hearing from you guys, I think it's probably brought your teams closer. So going into fall, I think teams are probably going to fall already a cohesive unit, where typically with the way we've done things in the past, it might take 2 or 3 weeks of practice to form that bond, where now the only way you could communicate with each other was basically through Zoom or some electronic platform, and not being able to actually interact face to face. I think maybe some of that team building has already taken place prior to even starting our season. So again, I commend you guys on, what you got, how you tried to or how you guys did make what could be considered a dim situation into a pretty bright situation, to take advantage of, not just dwelling on what was bad, but the possibilities that could be, and making the most of those possibilities. And with that, guys, I want to thank each of you for sharing and being a part of this discussion. For you folks that are part of the summit, I hope that the topics that we discussed was informative for you and that you're able to take something back to your school and share it with your teammates or your coaches, your administration to help make your school better. And so that you will have a great 2020-21 school year from an athletic standpoint and an educational standpoint. And with that, thank you again, and thank the panel for, Flynn, Jackson, and Jenny for being a part of this discussion today. And on behalf of that, good luck to you in the 2021 school year.